ladies and gentlemen, we've got new lore. We have got what looks like a brand new hero tease. It looks like we're going to get a Talon tank. This could be ridiculous, and we think his name could be Mauga, although this could be a massive debate by Blizzard. So this has just gone live. This is the Overwatch What You Left Behind short story by Alicia Wong. Now, we're going to go through this, and remember, Alicia Wong joined the Overwatch team last year. She is an award-winning writer, so this should be incredible. Now, yeah, we've got a nice bit of artwork there, beautiful. What You Left Behind, there we go, and then we get stuck into it. So, what I'm going to do is a bit of a dramatic reading of this. Now, bit of a disclaimer, I may get names wrong in this, and I may pronounce names completely wrong. If I do, just take it with a pinch of salt and we'll go over it. It's fairly long, so get ready for this, ladies and gentlemen, but it does contain a massive chunk of lore, and this is what we need for Overwatch. It's beautiful. Give us more of this, Blizzard. Okay, let's do this. What You Left Behind. Take a deep breath for me, Auntie, Batiste said. Madame Theobald, in her early 70s, and sharp as a needle, sat on the exam table, her feet hanging over the side in their plastic slippers. Batiste listened to her, breathing through the stethoscope pressed to her back. All right, that's good. Did you find anything interesting, young man? She said, stretching. While she met his gaze, she winked. Nothing unusual. Everything sounds like it's working properly. Batiste folded the stethoscope and held out his hand to help her down from the table. He was dressed for the clinic today, wearing all white scrubs. You'll get your labs back in a week or two. Dr. Mondesier will call you when they're in. Or should I ask her to call your nephew to let him know? I have a cell phone. She can call me directly. Madame Theobald stretched, her colourful bangles clattering around her wrists. She took Batiste's hand and eased her way off the exam table and onto the linoleum, the lino. It's a lino floor, ladies and gentlemen. Linoleum, there we go, floor. So you can, for that matter, but I don't seem to have your number. Batiste led her out of the exam room and back into the hallway. Well, unfortunately, I'm leaving town very soon, so I won't be able to handle your follow-up care. However, you'll be in Dr. Mondesier's very capable hands. He passed her to the harried-looking receptionist and ducked back into the hall. The tiny clinic was bustling. A steady stream of patients had kept both exam rooms busy all day. Even though it was late in the afternoon, there were still several people waiting in the lobby, parked in plastic chairs. The walls were painted in a cherry yellow, and the AC whirred noisily in the background. Dr. Mondesier, I think I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, guys, remember, I apologise, emerged from the second exam room, a pillar of calm amidst the storm. She held a clipboard in one hand. Her braided hair was done up in a bun, and she glanced at him through her glasses. How did it go in there with Madame Theobald? Batiste leaned against the wall. She seems healthy. Blood pressure in normal range. Her lungs sound good. No problem with her reflexes. I put it all in her chart. Did she ask for your number? Batiste sighed. Yeah, he said. Dr. Mondesier grinned, tucking her clipboard under her arm. Tucking her clipboard under her arm. Called it. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that I was only in town for a couple of days, and that you handled her follow-up care. Batiste glanced back into the lobby. Madame Theobald was sitting serenely in a chair, playing a game on her phone, while waiting for her nephew to pick her up. There was a cluster of teenagers sitting across from her, all on their phones too. He wondered if they were playing together. Because we all have phones, right? That's not actually in it. I've just literally made that up. I'm not very good at this dramatic reading life, but we carry on. But I don't have muscles like yours, Jean-Baptiste, said Dr. Mondesier, putting his bicep, the corner of her mouth quirked up into a smile. She headed for the reception desk, while her white coat billowing behind her. It's too bad you're leaving on Friday. This is the longest you've visited in years. They'd grown up in the orphanage together just outside of the Port de Paxis. She'd done well for herself and gone to medical school, while Batiste served in the Caribbean Coalition. Their childhood dream was to build a clinic for the folks in the neighbourhood, and Batiste had set aside a portion of his savings to make that dream come true. Even now, he still sent money back home whenever he could. You know I can't stay in one place for very long, said Batiste. Not with Talon after me. Went unsaid, but not unheard. He followed her back to the bookshelf behind the reception desk. This was where the clinic stored its records. Dr. Mondesier still believed in printing everything out, despite their digitized system. She was old-fashioned that way. Need help reaching that? He asked as she stretched upon her toes for something on the top shelf. Don't flatter yourself, she said, pulling down a red binder. Its spine was dated with the year, written in black permanent marker. Just offering to put these muscles to use, said Baptiste. He saw her flipping through the binder with a frown on her face. Is something wrong? Dr. Mondesier glanced at the full waiting room and lowered her voice. Can you check the supply cabinet for me? Baptiste looked down at the paper. It was an inventory list. He checked the supplies earlier in the day and he hadn't liked what he'd seen. Plastic bins that had held only a few bottles, boxes of old samples, too many empty shelves. Sure thing, what do you need? He asked. More of everything, she said under her breath, snapping the binder shut. She put it back on the shelf and began tumbling through the folders packed in beside it. But at this point, I just needed a current inventory, if you wouldn't mind. Baptiste laid a hand on her shoulder. Rosaline, what's going on? He said quietly. Is the clinic running out of money? Times are tough, but the real problem is that Sinclair Pharmaceuticals keep ratcheting up their prices. If only you had the NHS, ladies and gentlemen. We could barely afford their medications before, but now it's almost impossible, she said. She rubbed the permanent furrow between her eyebrows. It's criminal. We've even seen folks come in with complications because they're taking counterfeit pills, and who knows what's in those. But when your choices are suffering without medication or taking a chance on something that might help you. That's no choice at all, Baptiste finished. He looked out into the reception room at all of the people patiently waiting to be seen. Being unable to help the people you cared about was agonizing. He'd learned that lesson early. Is there any way I can help you? Dr. Mondesier smiled. She looks very tired. Unless you've got a magic wand, I don't think so. People like Bernard Sinclair don't change. Not even when it's the well-being of his own people on the line. If Overwatch was still around, they'd drive him out of town, muttered the receptionist. He was young, barely more than a teenager, and looked almost as exhausted as Dr. Mondesier. Baptiste wondered how long the clinic had been struggling. Like I said, a magic wand, Dr. Mondesier said dryly. One of the teens against the wall straightened up. I heard Overwatch is back, she said. Her friends looked up too. They'd grown up so fast while he was away, he remembered them running around the neighbourhood, still in primary school, the last time he visited. 4 years ago, right before he left Talon. Baptiste leaned on the counter. Is that so? And where did you hear that, Esther? Esther shrugged, glancing down at her phone. It's all over the net if you know where to look. You shouldn't believe everything you read online, Baptiste said with an easy grin. But he understood he dreamed about Overwatch when he was a teenager too. He had believed in shining heroes like the ones on TV and recruitment posters who kept the peace and protected the people around the world. He wanted to be like that once. That's why he joined the Caribbean Coalition and became a medic. But Overwatch had never come to Haiti, and by the time the organisation was disbanded, he had set those dreams quietly aside. There were so many ways to help people, and not all were as easy as having your face on a poster. Esther, looks like you're next. Let's head to exam room A, said Baptiste. Esther rose, dusting off her shorts. There was an Overwatch symbol drawn on the strap of her bag in permanent marker. When she caught him looking at it, she covered it with her hand and looked away. It was night by the time Baptiste left the clinic. He had insisted on staying until all the patients were taken care of. You're making me look bad, Dr. Mondesier remarked dryly, as if she wouldn't have worked until dawn on her own. It's good to have an extra set of hands. This was where he felt best, hard at work, taking care of the folks in the neighbourhood. He'd missed being home, he realised as he headed down the street. The bright sound of cicadas. Guys, you've got to look at the video. If you've got the video in another tab now, you need to look at the video because I literally don't know what that word is, but it's fine. The bright sound of cicadas. I think it's some sort of insect. I don't know. Ratting their wings, the sticky, familiar summer air, the delicious scent of pork griot drifting from the food stalls on the street corners. All of it. Since leaving Haiti and Talon, Baptiste had wandered the globe, never staying in one place for too long, but he always found his way back to Port de Paxis. This is the longest you've visited in years. And then, you do need to look at the screen now, guys. We get a great picture of what I think is the next hero. A massive, massive tank guy. It looks crazed. I mean, what the hell? All right, let's go. Let's roll down. Sometimes he wished he could stay, but it was dangerous, both to him and to people like Rosaline and Madame Therbau. The longer he lingered in one place, the easier he was to track down, and if Talon caught up to him, they wouldn't think twice about causing collateral damage. No use wasting the time I've got left, he said aloud, glancing up at the stars. The sky was a wide belt above the pale walled buildings, and the moon shone bright, a silver away from being full. A sliver, sorry, from being full. Especially not on such a nice night. Baptiste headed towards his favourite bar, a place called Le Fort's. It was a popular local spot, and he had known the owner, Monsieur Lefort, since Baptiste was a kid. He was a cheerful, friendly man who used to give Baptiste and Rosaline glasses of papaya juice on hot summer days. Lefort's was a place where people came to unwind, but today something was wrong. Lefort's was nearly empty, despite the late hour. Only 2 people sat at the bar. The first was a giant, broad-shouldered man covered in tattoos. He was dressed like a tourist in a tacky tropical shirt and a pair of sunglasses, and his dark hair had a streak of white running through it like a lightning strike. "What do you call this thing?" he was saying to Mr. Lefort, who was trapped behind the counter. He held a brightly coloured cocktail with an orchid garnish, which looked tiny in his massive hands. The last time Baptiste had seen those hands, they had crushed a man's throat through his combat armour. Oh, Lord, it's delicious. No, seriously, it's great. Nugent, what do you think? The other person at the bar, a thin, sharply dressed Vietnamese man, glanced over his shoulder at Baptiste. A Panama hat lay abandoned on the counter in front of him. "That took long enough," he said in a quiet voice. It was one that Baptiste had heard during every mission debrief, clinical and cold. "This had better be worth it, Mauga." The giant man turned. When he saw Baptiste, a wide, easy grin spread across his face. "Hey, buddy," he said. And the hair on the back of Baptiste's neck stood up. "You didn't think you could outrun us forever, did you?" 4 years ago, they arrived at Monte Cristi at dawn. The dropship descended over the beach, its blades chopping at the air. Inside, Baptiste sat shoulder to shoulder with the rest of his squad, his rifle over his knees. The motion rocked them back and forth, and the rumble of the carrier was as familiar as his heartbeat. "You're cleared to land," said Nugent. The analyst's voice filtered through Baptiste's earpiece, cold as frostbite. "Hey, buddy. Thinking strange thoughts?" Mauga thumped Baptiste's shoulder and grinned. When he leaned in, the body armor on his wide frame creaked. The Talon insignia on his chest stood out in bright red. "I'm sure there's something you can't share in polite company, but this ain't polite company. What's going on in that head of yours?" Baptiste grinned. "More than what's in yours." Mauga laughed. "Don't get full of yourself. It's straight Shakespearean in here." He tapped his forehead. Mauga liked to play the big, dumb brute, but he was sly and dangerous, which Baptiste appreciated. They'd met during their first days in Talon, and Baptiste had noticed him right away. It was hard not to. Mauga towered over the rest of the recruits, and he talked fast and loose, filling the air with his personality. He had a way of drawing strangers in like they were old friends. Mauga had noticed him too. He pulled Baptiste into his orbit, taking him under his wing. "I feel like you get me, Baptiste," Mauga had told him. "Stick with me, and we'll climb straight to the top." That had sounded good to Baptiste, and they'd been inseparable ever since. Now, when they were out in the field together, back to back, it felt like nothing could stop them. "Attention!" shouted Captain Cuvera, their commanding officer. He paced down the tight walkway between the lines of troops. "The cartel have been encroaching onto our territory. Our mission is to find and eliminate their leader, Daniel Fernandez. Intelligence has located his safe house. We'll move in, extract him, and get out. Copy?" "Copy," Baptiste shouted back with the rest of the squad. As they hovered over Monte Cristi, there was a sense of uneasiness that Baptiste couldn't shake. Everyone else was in good spirits, ready to snap back into laser focus when they touched down, but there was a hollowness to their laughter. Or maybe he was imagining it. The last missions had been rough, and some had involved civilians. That had deeply troubled Baptiste. He had joined because he had nowhere else to go. After those last missions, he thought about leaving. But he'd known better. The only way anyone left Talon was in a coffin. The hover carrier landed on the sand with a dull thud. Batiste jolted his seat, gripping his weapon. The impact shoved him against Mauga's solid frame. All clear, Nugans. I'm saying Nugan here. I know I'm saying this wrong, guys, so don't destroy me in the comments below. Like I said, I will get names a bit wrong, but there you go. I've probably just broke the immersion there, but okay. Nugians. I'm just going to go for Nugent for the rest of this, but I think that's wrong. Voice creaked in his ear. Move out. The doors opened, and Captain Cuvera turned to face the beach. The small fishing town lay ahead, quiet and dark. No lights were on in the windows. Let's move. Batiste stood, and Mauga stood with him. Whatever you're worrying about, don't. Get in, get it done, and get paid, Mauga said, only loud enough for Batiste to hear. He hefted his pair of machine guns, holy hell, pair of machine guns, each as tall as a full-grown man, like they weighed nothing. The coolant tanks on his back gleamed in the scant light. He raised his voice, letting it carry across the dropship. Now, who's ready to have some fun? Let me buy you a drink, said Mauga. He sat on Batiste's right at the bar, crowding him with his bulk. Nugan sat on his side, watching with cool, expressionless eyes. Oh man, you want one of these? They're amazing. What are you doing here? Batiste said quietly. From afar, he could count the exits to the bar, the windows along the walls, the back exit through the kitchen, the front door, all of them an eternity away. Well, as you can see, I'm enjoying the sun and the fresh ocean breeze, said Mauga, gesturing at his shirt. It was covered in ugly parrots and terrible yellow eyes. It reminded me of home. Talon's HQ is so dreary, it's nice to get out of Rome every now and again. You're rarely at HQ, Nugan said tartly. And we're not here to sightsee nor socialise. Mauga shrugged. I shrugged. I'm here to make the most of our work trip. You see what I'm up against, Batiste? I got him a hat, but he won't wear it. Nugan looked at the Panama hat on the bar top like it was the filthiest thing he had ever seen. It was a pink sunburned stripe across his nose. There was a pink sunburned stripe across his nose. Mauga slung a massive arm around Batiste's shoulder, knocking the wind out of him. Anyway, we just happened to be in town for a job and thought, hey, you know who I haven't seen in ages? Batiste. Maybe he'd like to get a drink with us for old time's sake. There was no such thing as a coincidence when it came to Mauga or Nugent. Batiste had spent 4 years evading Talon's notice. They would have had to go out of their way to find him. This had Mauga's fingerprints all over it. Get to the point, Batiste said sharply. Mauga reached over the bar and helped himself to a bottle of rum and a handful of glasses. Mr. Lefort had vanished into the back, probably for the better. Don't be so cold. I haven't seen you since Monte Cristi. He glanced down at Batiste, and his eyes burned. Monte Cristi, the screams, the smoke, the houses on fire, running, his lungs aching, knowing he needed to get out. Guess it's been a while, said Batiste, resting his elbows on the countertop, his heart hammered in his chest. 4 years, and you've never even wrote. That hurts me, buddy, deep inside. He thumped himself on the chest hard enough that Batiste winced. What were you doing all of this time? Breaking hearts? Traveling the world? Actually, don't tell me. We have lots of time on the way back to Talon HQ. I'm not going with you, said Batiste. That wasn't a request, Nugent said. His voice cut through the air like a knife. Mauga sighed. Sweet as always. What our mutual friend here means is that you can try to fight this, but you all know how that'll turn out. And if something happened to you, who'd be around to save your clinic? You've got to think about the big picture here, Batiste. All you have to do is cooperate and help us with the job, and I'm sure everything else will work out just fine. Mauga's arm was heavy around his shoulder. It probably weighed as much as a small person. There was no way that Batiste could make a break for an exit without Mauga knocking him flat. He could feel his options narrowing, falling away like dead leaves. There had to be a way out, if he could just find it. What's the job? Batiste said. Mauga grinned, long and sly. It was a look that Batiste recognised, the one that meant that Mauga thought he'd won. You're familiar with Sinclair Pharmaceuticals? They're the ones supplying your clinic, yeah? The clinic and every other medical institution in Haiti, thought Batiste. They would be, if anyone could afford their prices, said Nugan on Batiste's other side. He slid one of the glasses in front of Batiste. From anyone else, the gesture would have been courteous. From Nugan, it felt like a threat. It's short-sighted. When you have a monopoly, you control the market, but raise your prices too high and there will be no one left to buy. Mauga raised his glass, toasting them both. Bernard Sinclair is a bad man, like the rest of us, but the difference is he's gotten squirrely recently and isn't paying Talon what he owes. They're raking in money hand over fist, stealing it from your people and ours, so we're going to pay him a visit to remind him who he owes his success to. Rosaline has said that it would take a magic wand to change Bernard Sinclair's mind, and the clinic desperately needed medicine and supplies. Batiste wasn't a magic wand, but, lean on him a little, turn the pressure up, he said slowly. Mauga grinned. I knew you'd see it that way. We figured he might be more receptive to someone from the area, someone familiar. Play it right, and I'm sure he'd be happy to give your clinic whatever it wanted. So just to have a little break there, guys, this is actually what we want for law. We want actual law, because Overwatch just doesn't have law. Well, it does, but it's in really bad places, and it's nice to see it get developed. This is what we want to see. This is cool as hell. All right, let's carry on. Batiste took a sip of rum and weighed his options. He'd never met Sinclair in person, but he was also from Port de Paxis. This could be his one chance to negotiate for everything the clinic needed, but then he knew Mauga and Nugent too well to trust them even a single bit. They got on the jump on him. They knew where he'd be and laid in wait. They also knew about the clinic, so even if he managed to cut and run, Rosaline and the others would be in danger. He might be able to handle Nugent in a one-on-one fight, but Mauga was like a demon. Taking them both at the same time was completely out of the question. Batiste hesitated. Then he raised his glass and clinked it against Mauga's, his stomach churning. You're not giving me much of a choice, but if that's how it's going to be, I'm in. What's your plan? Nugent passed over an unmarked envelope. The details are in here. Don't open it until you reach a secure location. Burn it after you read it. When Batiste reached out to take it, Nugent held onto it for a moment. They locked eyes. I didn't agree to your involvement, Augustin. I told Mauga that we needed someone reliable, but he was insistent. Make it worth my time. Nugent let go and settled back into his seat. Batiste tucked the envelope into his pocket and filed that bit of information away for later. So what happens after the mission, he said, to us, to this? After all, the only way to leave Talon was in a coffin. Mauga smiled, the weight of his arms heavy on Batiste's shoulder. Don't worry about it, buddy, he said. We reached into his pocket and left a wad of cash on the counter. Batiste didn't have to count it to know that the drinks for the night and possibly the next week were covered. The analyst left first, rising from his seat and slipping into the dark like a shadow. Mauga lingered in the doorway, a mountain of a man bathed in a dim orange light. Mosquitoes buzzed around the string lights hanging from the rafters. See you tomorrow, bright and early, he said, and vanished into the night. Everything was on fire. Batiste stumbled through the flames, scanning for the enemy. He could barely see. The town was a war zone, and Talon soldiers moved through the smoke like wraiths, their red helmets gleaming. Houses burned around them, their rooftops collapsing inwards. All he could hear was gunfire and the screaming of civilians. The mission had gone according to plan at first. They dropped in and made their way to the player cartel's hideout with little issue. But when they made it into Fernandez's safe room, they found that he was gone. Captain Caveira had ordered them to tear the town apart until they had located the target. So they'd gone, breaking down doors and screaming for people to get out. All they found were terrified civilians, and Batiste had thought the mission was a wash. Frustrated, he stepped outside to survey the area. That was when Talon aircraft swooped in and opened fire on the town. Monte Cristi was a shelled out wreck. Batiste had been caught in the first blast and thrown back into the house. His helmet was damaged, and he wrestled it off. When he got to his feet, he found the family who lived there trapped under debris. He struggled to free them from and usher them to safety. But when he got to the street, he realized that the whole neighborhood was gone. He was distracted, and the family scattered. What's going on? He shouted into his headset. We have civilians caught in the crossfire. Captain Caveira's voice came online. As you are, Lieutenant Augustin. But sir, we have to set an example for these player cartel scum. If they won't give us Fernandez, they'll suffer the consequences. Batiste caught sight of something glittering. His squad mates were building a pile of looted goods in the middle of the street. Valuables stacked one on one. Heaps of clothing, people's possessions of family heirlooms jammed together into crates. A cluster of his squad mates dug through the masses, claiming items for themselves. Private Doubleday raked his hands through the jewelry, and Mazet pelted him with antique coins. Another private, Pakanowski, tossed fistfuls of 2,000 peso bills into the air, where they rained down on the street and the rest of the squad. They were laughing like they were having fun. The air smelled like burning. There was a sharp movement to Batiste's right. He whipped his rifle up, aiming at what had caught his attention. It was hard to see amidst the smoke, but a small shape was walking towards him. "Get back!" he shouted, pushing through the blaze. The figure stopped, and Baptiste saw that it was a young girl in a torn dress. She stared up at him with bright, angry eyes, a rock clenched in her fist. He could see himself reflected in those eyes, an unknown soldier who had destroyed her home. Baptiste stepped back, the point of his rifle dripping down. He turned and ran through the smoke and debris, the sound of screaming following him. So this is pretty heavy, guys, to be honest. All right, let's carry on. Got some awesome artwork there. Definitely going on the thumbnail. Baptiste woke, gasping and sweating. He fumbled for his phone, almost dropping it on the floor of his hotel room. The glowing numbers on the screen read 4:03 a.m. The dream lingered in his mind, but he could still smell the scent of burning houses. He pulled a box out from under his bed, lifting the lid. Inside was a set of sleek white combat armor and a scarf stitched with the medic's insignia. He laid out his boots, running his hands over their heavy metal frames. Each boot was equipped with an exoskeleton that allowed him greater mobility. Baptiste pressed gently on one to make sure it was still operational. The joints let out a soft, affirming hiss. It had been a while since he'd worn this outfit, but the weight of the armor settled easily onto his shoulders, familiar as an old friend. Baptiste packed quickly and slung his gear over his shoulder. Before he left, Baptiste pulled out a lighter. He touched the tip of the letter to the flame and watched the Talon insignia in the corner curl, crumple, and turn to ash. Bernard Sinclair's mansion sat on a beautiful, sprawling plot of land. It rose 3 stories from the ground, a stately building with pointed rooftops, elegant balconies, and an ornate trim. To Baptiste, the white-painted Victorian in the midday sun looked like something out of a fairy tale. "Did you know that this used to be a historic hotel?" said Mauga, flicking through his guidebook. He took up the entire back seat of the car, and his 2 giant guns rested on the floor in front of him. His heavy Talon combat armor clattered as they drove up the front gates. His ugly parrot print shirt was gone, but the sunglasses stayed. Before that, it belonged to a famous family of politicians, but they all died in horrible ways. It's definitely haunted. "Stay focused," Nugent said sharply, and wore the same dark suit and tie, all impeccable lines. Baptiste sat in the passenger seat beside him, dressed in his white combat armor, his helmet lying on his lap. "I scheduled an appointment, so Sinclair is expecting us. We walk in, get what we want, and we walk out. Simple as that." Baptiste glanced at him. "It's unusual to see you in the field," he said. "Sometimes you have to take care of business yourself," said Nugent. He stopped at the gates and held a badge in front of the sensors. There was a beep, and then the gates creaked open. As they were led into the mansion, Baptiste noticed that something fell off. Nugent's brief had mentioned that Vernard's security forces were part Talon, part private military contractors, but there were no Talon soldiers on site. Nugent walked ahead with their guide, and Baptiste and Mauga brought up the rear. Baptiste glanced at Mauga, who nodded slightly. The guide, The guide opened a heavy set of doors, revealing rows of bookshelves. A half-dozen armed guards waited inside the library, but there was no sign of Bernard Sinclair. Quick as lightning, Mauga stepped in front of Nugent, activating an energy shield. Baptiste covered the rear, rifle up as the door slammed shut behind him. The guards raised their weapons, but the first shot was Nugent's from a sidearm that Baptiste hadn't even seen him draw. One man went down without a sound. All right, so to just come into the story here, we have got Mauga, being described as having dual miniguns, large machine guns, but also he's got a deployable shield and he's got heavy Talon armor. This guy is a tank. The hail of enemy gunfire rattled against Mauga's shield, but it held fast. Baptiste incapacitated the 2 guards closest to him with a series of expert shots. He turned and caught the third before they could rush around the shield. Nugent shot another, then took aim at the last guard standing. "Hold up, leave that one alive," said Mauga, and Nugent nodded, adjusting his wrist. His bullet tore through the man's upper leg, and the guard howled and crumpled to the ground. Mauga deactivated his shield and lumbered forward, grabbing the man and slamming him up against the bookshelf. One massive hand went around his neck, pinning him in the air. "So much for the welcome wagon," said Baptiste, lowering his gun. His heart pounded hard in his chest. The library was a mess. "Let me guess, this wasn't part of your perfect little plan, was it?" Nugent holstered his weapon. "It was a possibility," he said, flatly. He looked deeply irritated that something had gone wrong, and that gave Baptiste a secret sense of satisfaction. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this. Our other forces are probably dead." "Say, where is your boss?" Mauga said conversationally to the guard as he had him pinned against the wall. The man choked. "Oh, sorry, I don't hear you. Let me ask again." He tightened his grip around his throat. He was enjoying this. These were the moments when the friendly, fast-talking mask slipped and Batiste could see the killer beneath. Mauga was both and more dangerous for it. Only one person had been able to talk him down in this state, and that was Batiste. Batiste came over, resting his forearm on the wall. Ease up a little. I think he's trying to tell us, he said. He kept his voice light, focusing on Mauga. He'd always been able to rein him in with patience and careful words, but it had been years, and Mauga was stronger than ever. Mauga whirled on him, his eyes burning with violence, nothing familiar or safe in his face. For a moment, Batiste felt a real jolt of fear, and then Mauga smiled, relaxing his grip. The guard gasped for air. My bad. Now, friend, where is Sinclair? He's the one we want to talk to, not you. His office, top floor, the man croaked. Thanks, buddy, Mauga said cheerfully, squeezing hard. The man slid motionless to the carpet. Why is it always the top floor? Batiste muttered. They'd done extractions like this all the time when him and Mauga had been squad mates. He slipped back into familiar patterns, acting on habit and muscle memory, before he'd been able to think about it, even during the interrogation. Good job there, Batiste, said Mauga, clapping a hand on Batiste's shoulder armor. He looked proud. It's like you've never left. That's what I'm afraid of, Batiste thought, looking at the fallen men scattered across the library floor. He glanced down his gun. It had been too easy to become the old Batiste. He'd spent so many years breaking himself of his old habits, and it felt like they'd grown back up overnight, twice as strong as before. It was Mauga's influence, or was it something in himself that he couldn't kill? Nugan retrieved a slim data pad, and it displayed a holographic blueprint of the mansion. We'll have to fight our way through. Luckily, the way up is straightforward. Just take the main stairs. There is no way around, asked Batiste, scanning the blueprint. I didn't come here to scale balconies, Nugan said. They're alerted to our presence already. We need to move swiftly and decisively. Use whatever cover we can and don't take stupid risks. Me? Never, said Mauga, sliding his giant guns from their back holsters. Can you imagine him sort of pulling them out, can't you? And then he's got like a shield as he fires them. Oh my God, so cool. I've lost where I am. All right. Okay. Me never, said Mauga, sliding his giant guns from their back holsters. But he studied the blueprint, hunting for anything that looked remotely out of the ordinary. A secret passage, a hidden door, anything. But he tore his eyes away from the blueprint and shrugged. Nothing interesting, he said. We should get moving before reinforcements arrive. Brilliant, said Nugan, stepping over the bodies on the carpet. They fought their way up to the main stairwell, up past the decorated columns and imported stone statues. Bullets shredded the ornate banisters. Mauga's shield protected them. They pushed steadily upwards. Batiste and Mauga moved in tandem, and with the practiced ease of soldiers used to fighting together. It had been years, but it had come back quickly, as natural as breathing. I missed you, you know, Mauga called over the roar of gunfire. He was enjoying every moment of the battle, relishing the adrenaline. Batiste could feel the same rush in his veins too. All those years you were on the run, and we could have been doing this instead. Don't tell me you didn't miss it too. Had he? More than he was willing to admit. He'd spent so many years running, and this felt right. Not being part of Talon, but having a place where he belonged, with a dependable team at his back. That was what he found when he joined the Caribbean Coalition, and later with Mauga and their squad, taking care of people centered him, made him feel whole. But Talon was different. What they asked him to do ate away at his soul, and in the end, he'd left for a reason, and he could not forget that. Watch your back, he shouted instead, taking down a mercenary who'd been able to shoot Mauga. That's your job, Mauga laughed. His gun tore a path through the guards, swarming at the top of the staircase, and they ducked for cover. He was in his element, a wild and unleashed. He'd been like this on their missions, a hurricane of a man. With you at my back, we can do anything, he told Batiste once. You're the best medic in Talon. You keep me alive and I'll protect you. No one stands a chance. Sinclair's office lay at the end of a long hallway on the third floor. Large portraits hung on the wall, glaring balefully down at them. The wallpaper was hideous. Batiste stepped forward quietly, nodding at Mauga. Nugent stayed close to the opposite wall. Mauga grinned and rammed the door with his shoulder, banging it open. The office was opulently furnished as the rest of the house, with a huge stained glass skylight overhead that cast coloured shapes across the carpet. Bernard Sinclair stood behind his desk, a revolver in his shaking hands. He was a handsome man in a deep burgundy suit, decked out in gold jewellery. The sweat of his face ruined the overall effect. I know why you're here, he said, his voice steady, and I know what it looks like, but I swear I am loyal to Talon. Well, colour me convinced, said Mauga, hefting one of his giant guns and activating his shield. He smirked, long and dangerous. Sinclair pulled the trigger twice. The bullets ricocheted off the shield, shattering the panels of the giant French windows overlooking the grounds. Batiste glanced at the windows, then back at Sinclair. Bad idea, he informed Sinclair, shaking his head. Nugan stalked forward. Mauga covered him with his shield. You sent us into a trap. You murdered the forces we stationed here for your protection. He snarled. Nugan yanked the gun from Sinclair's grasp and slammed it onto the desk. I even set up an appointment, and yet you continue to inconvenience us? Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet through your head right now. I have information you need, Sinclair said, the words falling quickly from his mouth. Don't shoot me. I'm just going to pick up this data pad and show you what's on it. He reached slowly for the data pad lying on the desk. Batiste kept his gun trained on Sinclair, tracking his movements. Sinclair glanced at the revolver once, but he didn't try to grab it from Nugan. Instead, he activated the data pad and tapped on a file. A golden hologram of the Earth popped up, rotating gently in the air. Then a series of bright points of light began to glitter across the globe. As the Earth turned, photo portraits popped up over the points of light. No, Batiste realized, not portraits. They were dossiers. An unfamiliar voice came online. Agents, Overwatch needs you. The world needs us now, more than ever. Are you with me? I got this message 3 days ago, Sinclair said. The hologram painted his face in gold light. It's a recall sent to every former Overwatch agent. Someone's trying to get the organization back together. You're Overwatch? Batiste said, stunned. He'd never met one before. All the dreams he had as a teenager, the recruitment post he'd hung above his bed at the orphanage, the secret hope that somehow, someday, Overwatch would come back and make everything better. And now one of his childhood heroes stood before him, a man willing to throttle his country to turn a profit and betray his organization to spare his own life. I was never in the field. I was just a handler, like you. Sinclair nodded at Nugan. Overwatch always took me for granted. That organization was poisoned from the very start, and the longer I was there, the more I could see that it was slowly rotting from the inside out. So you thought you'd help it along? Batiste demanded. No organization was perfect. He knew that personally and well, but Overwatch was supposed to stand for something better, a vision of a world that could exist rather than one that did. Sinclair regarded him with contempt. I don't think a Talon agent has any right to judge me. At least your people recognize my worth. By the time the UN disbanded Overwatch, I'd fed Talon enough information to keep you busy for years, and I'd been handsomely compensated for my troubles. Mauga slid Batiste a knowing look. Hadn't they all joined for the money or because they had nowhere else to go? But Sinclair was different. He had choices, and then he chose to stand by as Overwatch burned, with a match in his hand. Now he gestured at the lavishly furnished office. Working for Talon gave me something that Overwatch never could, and now I have exclusive information to offer. Nugan reached out and spun the globe. Overwatch agents' names and vital information flickered in the air as it rotated. The thing is, said Nugan, watching the agents' faces spin past, you're all assuming we don't have access to any of this information, or that you're the only ex-Overwatch on our payroll. Sinclair went pale. There really are no good people left, Mauga sighed, unholstering his second gun. What did I tell you, Batiste? Mauga had said that to him before once, and maybe, just maybe, he was right. Sinclair backed up a step, running into his desk chair. Mauga glanced at Batiste, a sly smile spreading across his face. All right, who wants to do the honors? How about you, buddy? Prove to Nugan that I was right about you. Nugan raised an eyebrow at Batiste. He was watching. They all were, waiting to see what he would do. Batiste walked towards Sinclair, advancing behind the desk. I know what you deserve, he said quietly, raising his rifle. Sinclair's desperate face hovered in the crosshairs, his pleas falling on uncaring ears. One shot and so many wrongs would be righted. Sinclair had done so much damage and refused to help so many people in need. He was the reason the clinic struggled to stock medicine and why the neighborhood had suffered without treatment. But would a bullet in his head really fix any of that? Batiste had never been able to execute a man in cold blood, even when he was in Talon. It would be more than was a step back into the life he'd promised he'd left. It would be a step beyond the point of no return. And it was a step he wasn't willing to take. Batiste's hand closed over the flashbang on his belt. There was a moment where Nugan's eyes widened, realizing what he was about to do. Batiste threw the flashbang down, and a blinding flash of light filled the room, followed by a deafening explosion. Any sound that Nugan and Mauga made was swallowed up. Batiste grabbed the datapad off the desk in one hand and shoved it into his jacket. He seized Sinclair around the middle, ignoring the man's startled shout. "Hold on tight," Batiste said. Activated his boots, exoskeletons. The frame clicked into place and propelled them upwards. As Batiste jumped, headed for the stained glass skylight overhead. He raised his arm, shielding his face. There was a gunshot, and pain tore through his left arm. He almost lost his grip on Sinclair. He didn't. He had to look down at who fired the shot, and that he was lucky to have survived. Together, Batiste and Sinclair crashed through the skylight. They landed on the roof in a shower of broken, colourful glass, tumbling across the tiles. From here, the thick grove of trees behind Sinclair's mansion spread out like a promise. No time to rest. Batiste tightened his grip on Sinclair and leaped from the roof, heading for the trees. A split second later, the roof blew into pieces in a hail of gunfire. Batiste landed amidst the trees, crashing through the branches on his way down. Sinclair began to demand something, but Batiste clamped a hand over his mouth. "Not a word," he whispered. When Sinclair nodded, wide-eyed, Batiste chanced to glance back. Mauga stood in the full length of the window, scanning the canopy of trees. All of the glass panels were blown out, shattered by the bullets from his massive guns. "Batiste," he called. "Buddy, I just want to talk." His eyes rested briefly on the patch of cover that shielded Batiste, and Batiste held his breath. It was the longest moment of his life. Nugan approached, shouting something that Batiste couldn't make out. He looked furious, rumpled. They stared at each other down for a moment, and then Nugan holstered his gun and disappeared from view. "You're only making this worse for yourself," Mauga said, his voice floating down from the window. He turned away from the window, and Batiste slipped away into the undergrowth. Sinclair followed behind him. Batiste's lungs ached from the smoke. He crouched over the edge of a fishing boat, untying its mooring rope. The docks were quiet, but the orange glow of flames in the distance glimmered on the water. "Don't tell me you're leaving already," said a familiar voice, and Batiste froze. "The party's just getting started." Mauga stood at the other end of the dock, his helmet off. His armor was scorched and bullet dented. His face was sooty, but he wore a wide, white grin. His guns were aimed at Batiste, and behind him, Monte Cristi burned. Batiste stood slow and careful. "I'm not going back there," he said. "Cruvera said there would be no civilian casualties." Mauga shook his head. "And you were naive enough to believe him? Look around, Batiste. This is what we do." He spread his arm wide. "Remember Makati, all that time in Singapore? Or did you conveniently forget how those went down too?" "Cruvera told us that these missions were on the level," Batiste said weakly. He'd known the truth even then, but he hadn't wanted to believe it. And from the look on Mauga's face, he knew that too. Of course he did. And of course they weren't. But who cares? We're in too deep, Batiste. For a moment, all of his bravado dropped away, and it was just the two of them. No audience standing beside the water. When he spoke, it was quiet. There are no good people. Not you, not me. All we can do is have fun while we've got the chance." None of this was fun. The killing, the looting, any of it. All Batiste felt was a sickening sense of horror. Mauga walked down the dock towards him. Batiste drew his gun, aiming at Mauga, who stepped in his tracks. "I'm not going back there," he repeated. "You'll have to kill me first." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The only sounds were the roar of the waves and the faint dull of the crackle of flames. Batiste's earpiece buzzed, and from the way Mauga cocked his head, he was hearing the same message. "Lieutenant Augustin, come in," snapped Captain Cruvera. "Mauga, have you found him yet?" Batiste's heart hammered in his chest. Even if he got off the first shot, and he didn't want to shoot Mauga, he couldn't fight off the rest of his squad. If Mauga gave him away, that was it. He was as good as dead. Mauga held Batiste's gaze for a long moment. Finally, he reached up, touching his headset. "No sign of him here, Captain," he drawled. "I'll head back. Copy." "Copy that," said Cruvera, and the line went quiet. Mauga lowered his weapon. "I know you're not going to shoot me, Batiste," he said. "You can put your rifle away." Batiste didn't lower his gun. "Why did you do that?" he asked. Mauga shrugged. "I like you, Batiste. There's something special about you. And I didn't feel like dragging your body all the way back there because you're damn heavy." He stretched. "Now get going. Just remember, you owe me. Call me when you're ready to come home." Batiste backed up, keeping Mauga in sight. True to his word, the man didn't move to stop him. "Thank you," he said quietly. He didn't know whether Mauga heard it, and he didn't stay to find out. He started the motor and pulled away from the dock, leaving Mauga standing by the water. By the time Batiste made it to the wharf, he'd lost his pursuers. Sinclair's security force didn't know the city like he did, and neither did Mauga or Nugan. At least Sinclair had stopped fighting him once he realized that Batiste was his best chance at getting out of the situation alive. Batiste slipped into a warehouse and Sinclair stumbled in behind him. Batiste's shoulder ached where Nugan had shot him, and he'd used his scarf to fashion a makeshift bandage for the wound. Batiste picked his way through the crates of coffee and mangoes until he got to a blue barrel nestled in the back. He removed the top and scooped the bag up he'd stashed early that morning, hours before he'd met Mauga and Nugan. He left Sinclair hidden behind a couple of large shipping containers, clutching a bottle of water. Here's the deal, Batiste said, resting one foot on a nearby crate. I'm going to send someone to retrieve you in a couple of hours when all of this is blown over. They'll help you get out of town. In return, you're going to supply every clinic in the country with whatever they need, free of charge. Sound good? Sinclair was ashen. He didn't seem to be registering anything Batiste was saying. A sudden brush with death does that to a man, Batiste thought dryly. Batiste snapped his fingers in front of Sinclair's face, and Sinclair jumped. Hey, you still with me? Sinclair found his voice. Whatever you want, just get me out of here alive. Batiste shrugged. That part's up to you. I'd like to think you're a man of your word, but if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, I'll let Talon know where to find you instead. As Batiste turned to go, Sinclair raised his voice. Why didn't you kill me back there, he asked. Batiste paused. You weren't worth it, he said, and slipped out of the warehouse. There was a number of commercial fishing vessels docked at the wharf, bobbing gently with the movement of the tides. Crates of cargo were stacked nearby, waiting to be loaded in. Batiste made a beeline for the private vessels, picking one at the end of a line of fusion energy charging stations. These boats hovered just above the water, emitting a low hum. Well, this looks familiar, said a voice behind him. Mauga walked down to the pier, the sun catching on his armor. He held his guns like they weighed nothing. There was an edge to his voice, one that Batiste recognized as that post-combat adrenaline rush. I'll let you go once, Batiste. You know I can't do it a second time. Batiste regarded him. His own body hummed with restless, alert energy. Where's Nugan? Mauga shrugged. Who knows? Probably back at the mansion dealing with the mess, disappointed with everyone around him as usual. I keep telling him that it's his face is going to get stuck like that. He raised his gun and Batiste dove for cover. Bullets showered the concrete, tearing into crates nearby. Mangoes spilled out, splattering Batiste as he crouched behind a shipping container. Batiste gripped his rifle tight. Mauga meant business. I thought you wanted to take me back to Talon alive, he shouted. I do, said Mauga. The fire was back in his voice, that same promise of violence. But it sounds like you need a little more convincing. We can still do this the right way. Never thought I'd hear you say that, said Batiste. He chanced to peek out from behind the shipping container. Another rain of bullets chased him back. His heart hammered in his chest as he counted the remaining ammunition, a lot less than what Mauga had apparently. By the way, I heard what happened to Captain Crivera and the boys. That's a real shame, Mauga called out. His footsteps echoed closer, thudding along the pier. Their old squad had made the mistake of coming after Batiste one by one. He'd left Crivera for last. Is it? Batiste panted, his back pressed against the container. There was a loud metal click as Mauga reloaded, feeding a new belt into his guns. Nah, I never liked him. Batiste swore as more bullets tore up the concrete nearby. Shells clattered to the ground around him. There was no way to get a boat from here, and time was running short. Sinclair's forces would soon catch up any minute. A round, flat shape dug into his back, and he shifted his bag over his shoulder. Wait. He opened it and dug inside, retrieving a disc-shaped device. It was something he'd been working on for months, and it was still just a prototype, but maybe. Don't shoot, Batiste shouted. I'm coming out of here. He extended his arm out in the open, holding his breath. No bullets followed. So he slowly edged out from behind the shipping container. Mauga waited a few yards away, sunglasses on. His weapons were still aimed straight at Batiste. The ocean breeze blew through his hair, and he grinned that wide, wide grin. Finally come to your senses, buddy? Not really, said Batiste, whipping his rifle out from behind the shipping container. He threw the disc into the air and unloaded his clip into the fusion energy charging station beside Mauga. The resulting explosion shattered the air. The middle of the pier was blown into pieces, chunks of concrete raining into the bay. Some crashed into the desks of nearby boats, capsizing them. Seagulls scattered overhead, shrieking. When the smoke cleared, Mauga was gone. Batiste lay on the end of the pier, battered but breathing. The prototype device hummed in the air, emitting a protective field of energy around him. It was the only thing that had kept him alive. Good to know that works, he wheezed, pressing a button on top. The device powered down, and the ring of energy dissipated. He collected the disc and hobbled towards one of the remaining vessels, a luxury yacht docked at the far end of the pier. It had the Sinclair painted across its stern in bold, flowing script. It was easy to cut through the rope and yank the charging cord out. and easier to hotwire the engine. As Batiste took the wheel, he looked over his shoulder. The wharf was empty. No Mauga or mercenary troops in sight. So much for a vacation, he muttered. The yacht pulled away from the pier and out to sea, guided by his expert hand. Batiste had made it clear, had made it an hour away from Port de Paxis before he allowed himself to relax. The yacht's motor hummed as the vessel cut through the water. The ocean stretched out all around him, an endless expanse of blue. The sea breeze smelled like freedom. He peeled off his combat armor and hauled his medkit out of his bag. He was in bad shape, but he'd live. Still got it, he said to himself, fishing in the kit for sutures. Just like that time in Makati. As Batiste raided the refrigerator aboard Sinclair's yacht, he felt his phone buzz. Surprised, he checked it and realized that he had signal. Batiste sat down, holding his phone and trying to figure out what to say to Rosaline. She'd find out what happened to Sinclair soon. If word hadn't reached her already, he had so much he wanted to say to her, but little of it was safe. Talon would be monitoring her correspondence, hoping to track him down. He couldn't tell her where he was coming home, when he was coming home, or where he was going. Finally, he typed out a message and hit send. Hey Ross, I left Sinclair in a warehouse in the docks. He promised to supply the clinic for free in exchange for a plane ticket out of town. Send someone to make the trade. If he gives you trouble, remind him that we had a deal. Batiste hesitated, then sent one more. Be careful, okay? Hopefully Talon wouldn't come after her and the others. Batiste blinked away memories of Monte Cristi in flames. No, it was more likely that they keep the clinic under surveillance and lie in wait, hoping he'd come back to check on it. But it will be a long time before it was safe to return. Batiste thought of Mauga in the explosion-scorched pier. There had been no sight of him, but knowing Mauga, he was probably still alive, and it was unwise. Maybe it was unwise, but Batiste secretly hoped that he was. Batiste turned on Sinclair's data pad, and the holographic globe popped up, followed by the profiles of the Overwatch agents, their real names, their call signs, their vital stats. He turned the globe with one finger, reading the files. He spotted a familiar face hovering over the Middle East, a blonde woman he had met on a humanitarian aid site in Venezuela. They had worked together for almost a week before he had to move on. There was something about her calm, steady demeanor and self-assurance that reminded him of Rosaline. Her Overwatch file read, Mercy, Agent ID 3945_46, real name, Dr. Angela Ziegler, status, inactive. He remembered Mercy from the recruitment posters, but the Overwatch agent rising above the battlefield on golden wings seemed so different from Dr. Ziegler performing triage on suffering people and sweating in the makeshift tent clinic. If she was a former Overwatch agent, then surely she'd gotten the recall too. Batiste tapped the glowing dot, marking her last known position on the map. He'd thought that Overwatch was dead, but maybe it wasn't. If Talon was coming for Dr. Ziegler, then she had a right to know. He'd need help tracking her down, but luckily, he knew just who to ask. Batiste opened an encrypted app on his phone, entered the password, and hit the call button on the bottom of his screen. It only rang twice before a familiar voice came through the speaker. Hey, Mijo. It's been a while. Hey, Sombra, he said, looking at Dr. Ziegler's profile. Can you do me a favor? Cool. All right, guys. So that was a complete reading of the new short story. Great. I mean, we've got a lot of lore there, a lot of stuff to take in. This looks like the run up to a new hero. Gives us a lot of backstory with Batiste. Gives us a lot of backstory with the way Mercy and Sombra interact with Batiste, and Talon potentially chasing down activated Overwatch agents, which is actually awesome. All right, guys, I've been Stylosa. This is Unit Lost. I'm getting excited now because we're on the path to a new hero launch. It's going to be super cool. Oh, Lord. If you like that, guys, let me know on Twitter in the comments of the video, because maybe I can do more of this in the future. It's not something I do a lot of. As you can probably tell, I did stutter a few times in that. But I tried my best, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. All right. Catch you on the next one. Toodaloo.